No one noticed her at first. She was just another woman walking out of a hospital in the late afternoon. Shoulders squared, a cardboard box tucked against her chest. Footsteps steady but quiet. To everyone watching, it looked like defeat. Another employee let go. Another name erased from the schedule. Then, the air changed. A deep, thunderous roar rolled across the parking structure. Windows rattled. Loose papers lifted off the ground. Heads snapped upward as a military helicopter descended toward the hospital helipad, blades cutting the sky with violent precision. Security froze. Doctors ran outside. Nurses stood shoulder to shoulder in stunned silence. And then boots hit concrete. Armed soldiers moved with disciplined speed, eyes locked on one person only. They stopped a few feet in front of the woman with the box. The commanding officer raised his hand in a sharp salute. "Ma'am." The word echoed like a gunshot. In that moment, everything everyone thought they knew about her shattered. Before the truth is revealed, take a second to tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. And if you're drawn to stories where silence hides power, don't forget to subscribe. Because this was never just a hospital story. Emily Carter had learned long ago how to disappear in plain sight. In a hospital that never slept, where alarms screamed and egos collided, being invisible was sometimes the safest way to survive. She moved through the corridors with efficient steps, shoulders relaxed, eyes observant but never intrusive. Her badge identified her as part of the clinical staff. Nothing more, nothing less. No titles, no honors. Just a name and a department code most people barely glanced at. To her co-workers, Emily was competent but distant, quiet to the point of discomfort. She didn't gossip in the break room. She didn't linger after shifts. She didn't complain about long hours or understaffed nights. When someone asked how she was doing, she answered with a nod or a simple, "I'm fine." That silence made people uneasy. At Riverside Memorial Hospital, unease often translated into judgment. "She's cold," one nurse whispered during a night shift, watching Emily methodically prepare trauma supplies with almost surgical calm. Or arrogant, another replied, "Like she thinks she's better than us." Emily heard it all. She always did. She just never reacted. The hospital itself was a massive concrete structure just outside a major U.S. city, a hub for emergency cases across several counties. Helicopters came and went regularly, airlifted car accidents, farm injuries, gunshot victims from miles away. Riverside prided itself on speed and reputation. Mistakes were buried. Image was everything. And Emily Carter didn't fit the image. Her supervisor, nurse manager Linda Pearson, had tried to fix that early on. Linda was polished, political, and deeply invested in hierarchy. She preferred staff who smiled at the right people and stayed quiet at the right times. Emily did neither. "She doesn't engage," Linda once told the hospital director during a performance review. "Technically sound, yes, but detached. Hard to trust someone you can't read." What Linda didn't say was that Emily never flinched under pressure. Not when a trauma patient coded. Not when blood covered the floor. Not when family members screamed inches from her face. While others panicked or froze, Emily narrowed her focus and acted. That unnerved people even more. The turning point came on a Wednesday afternoon, the ER already strained beyond capacity. The digital board glowed red with wait times pushing 6 hours. Tempers were short. Staff were exhausted. Then the call came in. Male patient, early 40s, unidentified, severe internal injuries, transported by private vehicle instead of ambulance. That alone raised eyebrows. When the gurney burst through the ER doors, Emily was already moving. One look told her this wasn't a typical case. The man's breathing was controlled, despite the pain. His pulse fast but steady. The pattern of bruising across his torso didn't match a car accident. "Vitals?" she asked calmly. A junior nurse rattled them off, voice shaking. Emily leaned closer, scanning the patient's hands, calluses in specific places. Old scars near the wrists and forearms, faded but unmistakable to a trained eye. She caught a glimpse of a tattoo partially hidden beneath dried blood. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. This man had been trained. Not casually, professionally. "Prep trauma, too," Emily said. "We're losing time." Before anyone could respond, Dr. Richard Hale stepped in. Hale was everything Emily was not: loud, authoritative, and painfully aware of his status. A senior trauma surgeon with decades of experience, he ruled the ER like a battlefield general. People deferred to him out of fear as much as respect. "Who authorized that?" Hale snapped, glaring at Emily. She met his eyes briefly. "We need immediate imaging and blood products. His pressure is unstable." Hale scoffed. "You don't give orders here." "I'm not," Emily replied evenly. "I'm telling you what's necessary." The room went quiet. That was her mistake. Hale's expression hardened. "Step back," he said. "Now." Emily did. But not before catching something else, a faint tremor in the patient's jaw. A signal, subtle, intentional. He was trying to communicate. As the team rushed the patient toward imaging, Emily followed protocol to the letter. But she also documented everything, every delay, every override, every decision Hale made that contradicted standard trauma procedure. By the time the patient was stabilized, Hale was furious. "You questioned me in front of my team," he accused, later cornering Emily near the medication room. "You embarrassed me." "I focused on the patient," she said simply. "That's not how this place works," Hale replied coldly. "You don't get to freelance." Emily held his gaze. "Then maybe this place needs to change." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Within hours, whispers spread. Emily had overstepped. Emily had disrespected authority. Emily was dangerous. By the end of her shift, she was called into an emergency administrative meeting. The room was small and windowless. The hospital director sat at the head of the table. Linda Pearson was beside him. Dr. Hale leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, confidence radiating off him. They spoke first. Emily listened. They accused her of insubordination, of disrupting workflow, of acting beyond her role. Hale presented selectively edited documentation, carefully omitting key details. The director frowned. "Why didn't you escalate your concerns properly?" he asked. Emily answered honestly. "There wasn't time." Silence followed. The decision came faster than she expected. Administrative leave, effective immediately, pending review. Linda avoided her eyes. Hale didn't bother hiding his smirk. Emily nodded once. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. As she left the room, carrying the weight of a system she knew too well, one thought echoed quietly in her mind. They still have no idea what they just did. Outside, dusk settled over the hospital. Emily walked toward the exit, unaware that forces far beyond Riverside Memorial were already moving, drawn by a single patient, a single decision, and a woman who had never learned how to be anything but calm under fire. By the time Emily Carter reached the locker room, the hospital felt different. Not louder, not quieter, just tighter, like the walls had shifted a few inches inward, squeezing the air out of every familiar space. She moved methodically, unlocking her metal locker, folding her scrubs with the same precision she used for sterile instruments. Each motion was controlled, deliberate, an old habit that surfaced whenever the ground beneath her feet began to slip. Administrative leave. The words echoed without emotion. She had heard worse. What surprised her wasn't the decision. It was how cleanly it had been delivered. No hesitation. No real investigation. Just a swift removal of the inconvenience. She closed the locker and sat on the bench for a moment, longer than necessary, eyes unfocused. Around her, other staff filtered in and out, whispering, pretending not to stare. No one asked what happened. No one wanted to be associated with fallout. Emily didn't blame them. As she walked the long corridor toward the employee exit, memories crept in, not as flashbacks, but as pressure. Familiar, persistent, unwelcome. She hadn't always worked in a hospital. Years ago, long before Riverside Memorial, Emily Carter had lived by different rhythms. Back then, silence meant survival. Discipline wasn't encouraged, it was demanded. Mistakes didn't result in write-ups. They got people killed. That version of her had learned to read the smallest details. The way a hand trembled, the pause before a breath, the pattern of scars that told a story no chart ever would. That was why the man on the gurney had unsettled her. The calluses, the scars, the way his eyes tracked movement even while drifting in and out of consciousness. Civilians didn't notice things like that. People like Emily did. She pushed the thought away as the automatic doors slid open. Evening air hit her face, cool against skin that still smelled faintly of antiseptic. The parking lot stretched ahead, rows of cars glinting under sodium lights. That was when she heard it. A familiar sound, but distant, almost lost beneath the hum of traffic. Rotors, Emily paused. At Riverside, helicopters weren't unusual, but this was different. Lower, heavier. The sound didn't fade, it grew. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder and continued walking, refusing to let curiosity pull her back. Whatever was happening inside that hospital was no longer her concern, or so she thought. Inside, the ER chaos was quietly reorganizing itself. The unidentified patient had been moved to a secured room under Hale's supervision. 2 hospital security guards stood nearby, instructed not to let anyone unauthorized enter. Hale paced, reviewing scans with a clenched jaw. Something about the case felt wrong, and not in a way he could articulate. The patient's injuries were extensive, but precise. Damage that suggested force without randomness, training without theatrics. And when Hale reviewed the man's vitals, one thing stood out despite everything. The patient wasn't panicking. He was waiting. Hale didn't like that. "What do we know about him?" Hale demanded. "Nothing concrete," a resident replied. "No ID, no emergency contacts, no record in state databases." Hale scowled. "Run it again." They did. Same result. Minutes later, the resident returned, voice lower. "Doctor, we just received a call." "From who?" The resident hesitated. They wouldn't say. Just asked if we had a male patient admitted with specific injuries and a tattoo on his left ribcage. Hale stiffened. "And you told them no?" They already knew. The rotors were louder now. Outside, staff gathered near windows. Security radios crackled with overlapping chatter. Someone mentioned the helipad. "Is there a scheduled landing?" a nurse asked. No security replied. "Not on any board." On the far side of the parking lot, Emily stopped walking. She had felt this before. The subtle shift in atmosphere, the way people moved differently when authority entered a space. Not administrative authority, real authority. The kind that didn't ask permission. She turned, slowly. The helicopter was descending fast. Military. Matte finish. No hospital markings. The downdraft kicked up dust and loose debris as it touched down on the helipad with controlled force. The sound was deafening, then abruptly muted as the blades slowed. People stared. Phones came out. Conversations died mid-sentence. Emily stood still, bag hanging from her shoulder, heart rate steady but alert. From the helicopter, the door slid open. Boots hit concrete. Not rushed. Not aggressive. Precise. A group of soldiers emerged, gear immaculate, posture rigid. Their presence alone shifted the balance of the space. This wasn't a show of force, it was a retrieval. Inside the hospital, Hale watched through the glass, unease crawling up his spine. "This isn't normal," Linda Pearson whispered beside him. "This has to be about the patient." Hale said nothing. His attention was locked on the soldiers' formation. On the way, they scanned the area not like guards, but like professionals evaluating threats. Then something happened that Hale didn't expect. The soldiers didn't head for the ER entrance. They stopped. One of them raised a hand, signaling the rest to wait. His gaze had fixed on someone else entirely. Emily felt it before she saw it, the unmistakable sensation of being identified. She turned fully, now meeting the eyes of the approaching officer. He was younger than she expected, early 30s maybe, but the respect in his posture was unmistakable. He walked toward her steps, measured, then stopped a few feet away. Around them, the parking lot had gone silent. "Ma'am," he said quietly, voice firm. "We need to speak with you." Emily didn't react, not outwardly. Inside, a door she had kept locked for years creaked open. "I'm no longer affiliated with this facility," she replied calmly. "You should talk to hospital administration." The officer's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "With respect," he said, "we're not here for the hospital." Behind him, more soldiers moved into position, not threatening, just unmistakably protective. "Across the lot, Doctor." Hale stepped outside, confusion etched across his face. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered. The officer straightened, then did something no one expected. He raised his hand in a crisp salute. "Ma'am," he said louder this time, "we've been trying to reach you." The word rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Emily closed her eyes briefly. So much for staying invisible. For a moment, no one moved. The salute lingered in the air, sharp and unmistakable, as if time itself had been ordered to stand at attention. Conversations died. Phones froze mid-record. Even the helicopter blades, now slowing behind them, seemed to fade into the background. "Ma'am." The officer lowered his hand but did not relax his posture. His tone wasn't loud, yet it carried authority that cut through the confusion like a blade. Emily Carter exhaled slowly. This was the moment she had spent years avoiding, not because she feared it, but because she understood its cost. Once a truth like this surfaced, it couldn't be folded back into silence. It demanded attention, consequences. "I told you," she said evenly, keeping her voice low, controlled. "I'm done with that life." With all due respect, the officer replied that life isn't done with you. A ripple of murmurs spread through the onlookers. Staff clustered near the glass doors, trying to piece together what they were seeing. Soldiers, salutes. A woman who had just been escorted out of her job now standing calmly in front of armed military personnel, as if this were nothing more than an inconvenient interruption. Dr. Hale pushed forward, his white coat flapping slightly in the rotor wash. "Excuse me," he snapped, inserting himself into the space. "This is hospital property. You can't just land military aircraft and harass former staff." The officer didn't even look at him. Instead, another soldier stepped forward, older, broader, with the unmistakable presence of someone used to being obeyed without question. His eyes flicked briefly toward Hale, then back to Emily. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am," he said. Emily hesitated. Every instinct told her to shut this down, to walk away. But the tension in the soldiers' faces told her this wasn't a courtesy call. "Go ahead," she said quietly. "The patient you treated today," the older soldier continued, "is under federal protection. He shouldn't be alive." That landed harder than any accusation Hale had thrown at her. Emily's jaw tightened. "But he is." "Yes," the soldier said, "because of you." Behind them, Hale scoffed nervously. "This is absurd. That patient was unstable. We followed protocol." Emily turned to him then. Slowly, fully. "No," she said. "You followed your ego." The words were calm, but they struck like a slap. Hale bristled. "You're out of line." The older soldier's gaze snapped to Hale, sharp and cold. "Doctor, I'd suggest you choose your next words carefully." Hale opened his mouth, then closed it again. The officer who had saluted Emily stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, the man you stabilized is a key witness in an ongoing investigation involving stolen military-grade medical equipment and compromised trauma protocols. Someone inside this hospital has been altering records." A chill ran through the group listening nearby. Emily felt the pieces slide into place. The delayed imaging, the overridden blood orders, the falsified documentation. "And you think it's him," she said, eyes flicking briefly toward Hale. "We know it," the officer replied. "But without you, we don't have enough to prove intent." Hale laughed, a brittle, hollow sound. "This is ridiculous. You can't base an investigation on the word of a disgruntled employee." Emily didn't respond to him. Instead, she addressed the soldiers. "I told you I wouldn't get involved again." The older soldier nodded. "You said the same thing the last time." That comment stirred something in the crowd. The last time, Linda Pearson whispered from the doorway, face pale. Emily closed her eyes for half a second. Years ago, she had stood in a very different environment, making decisions under fire, decisions that saved lives but ended careers. She had walked away afterward, deliberately choosing anonymity over medals, healing over command. "I left for a reason," Emily said. "I wanted something quieter." The officer's expression softened. "And you gave everything to keep people alive. That didn't change who you are." The tension in the parking lot reached a breaking point when hospital security finally arrived. 3 guards jogging up, hands hovering near their belts, uncertainty written all over their faces. "Sir," one of them said to the older soldier, "we need to know what's going on." The soldier turned calm but unyielding. "Step back." The guard hesitated. Then, with unmistakable finality, the older soldier reached into his jacket and produced a badge, black, unmarked, heavy with meaning. The guards froze. Hale went pale. Emily watched as realization dawned across faces that had once looked at her with indifference or disdain. Federal jurisdiction. "This hospital," the soldier said, voice carrying, "is now part of an active investigation." Hale tried to recover. "You can't just 'we can,'" the officer cut in. "And we are." Linda Pearson stepped forward, hands shaking. "Emily, is this true?" Emily met her gaze. "I warned you," she said softly. "I told you something was wrong." Linda swallowed hard. Inside the ER, the secured room was now surrounded not by hospital staff but by soldiers. The patient awake now turned his head slightly as Emily entered. Their eyes met. Recognition passed between them, silent, heavy, absolute. "You did good," he rasped. Emily nodded. "So did you." You held on. Outside, Hale was being escorted away from his office, his protests growing louder as boxes of files were seized. The confident surgeon from earlier that day now looked small, his authority stripped in minutes. In the parking lot, staff stood stunned. Emily watched it all from a distance, arms folded loosely across her chest. The officer approached her again. "Ma'am, command wants you back, at least temporarily." Emily looked toward the hospital entrance, toward the place she had tried to make her quiet life. Then she looked at the soldiers. "Temporary," she said. "On my terms." A faint smile tugged at the officer's mouth. "That's all we hoped for." As the helicopter's blades began to spin again, Emily felt the weight of old responsibilities settle back onto her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a reminder. She had walked away once. This time she would make sure no one else paid the price for silence. And inside Riverside Memorial, the truth had only just begun to surface. The hospital changed overnight. By sunrise, Riverside Memorial no longer felt like a place of healing. It felt like a site under quiet siege. Unmarked federal vehicles lined the perimeter. Soldiers stood at strategic points, not blocking access but making their presence unmistakably clear. Every door badge scan was logged, every server query monitored. Inside, the air was thick with unease. Staff moved differently now. Conversations dropped to whispers. People checked over their shoulders before speaking. The confidence that once belonged to senior doctors and administrators had evaporated, replaced by something closer to fear. Emily Carter watched it all from a small conference room on the 3rd floor. She sat alone at the long table, hands folded, posture straight but relaxed. A legal pad lay in front of her, untouched. Across the glass wall, 2 federal agents reviewed files pulled from hospital archives, records Emily had never been allowed to see. "You were right," one of them said, finally glancing up. "The alterations are subtle. Timestamps shifted. Dosages changed just enough to look like clinical judgment." Emily nodded. "That's how you hide intent. You never make it obvious." The agent studied her. "You've seen this before." "Yes," she said. "Different setting. Same logic." Hours earlier, she had been formally reinstated temporarily under federal authority. Not as staff, as an external consultant. The distinction mattered. Emily had insisted on it. "I'm not here to reclaim a job," she had told them. "I'm here to make sure the truth survives." They had agreed. Now, as the investigation unfolded, patterns emerged. Dr. Richard Hale hadn't acted alone. He had influence, leverage, and access. He controlled trauma flow. He decided which cases escalated and which quietly disappeared into paperwork. But motive was the missing piece. "He's not just protecting himself," Emily said, scanning a chart projected onto the screen. "This is coordinated. Someone benefits from patients not surviving or not speaking." The agent frowned. "We thought the same." Emily leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing. "Your witness, the man I treated. He wasn't just attacked. He was intercepted." "Yes," the agent admitted. "He was supposed to be transferred before he ever reached this hospital. But he wasn't," Emily said, "because someone rerouted him." The agent hesitated. "We don't know who." Emily tapped the table once. "You will." Across the hospital, Dr. Hale sat alone in a windowless office under guard, his once crisp coat discarded tie loosened. The arrogance that had defined him was gone, replaced by cold calculation. He wasn't panicking. That worried Emily more than anything. "People like him," she said quietly to the agent, "don't crumble under pressure. They wait for leverage." As if summoned by the thought, an agent entered the room, expression tight. "We have a problem," he said. "The witness is asking for you." Emily stood immediately. The secured room was dimmer than before, lights lowered to reduce stimulation. The patient lay still, monitors humming softly. His injuries were significant, but he was stable for now. "You shouldn't be up," Emily said as she approached. He gave a faint smile. "Story of my life." She checked his vitals herself, habit overriding protocol. "What's wrong?" "They know I'm here," he said, "and they won't stop." Emily met his eyes, who he swallowed, pain flickering across his face. "Not just Hale. This goes higher. Contractors, suppliers, people who don't like loose ends." Emily felt a familiar tightening in her chest. "You need to tell them everything," she said. "I will," he replied. "But there's something else." She waited. "They didn't expect you," he said. "When I saw you in the ER, I knew I had a chance. Emily didn't respond. She understood the weight of what he was saying. Listen to me, he continued, voice urgent despite his injuries. If they can't silence me here, they'll come from the outside. Transfer isn't safe. Emily straightened. We'll protect you. He shook his head slowly. Not like this. You need to take control. A knock interrupted them. One of the agents leaned in. We just received an injunction. Hospital counsel is challenging federal authority to hold staff records. Emily's jaw tightened. On whose behalf? The agent hesitated. Dr. Hale's attorney. Of course. In the corridor, Hale's voice echoed faintly as he argued with agents demanding calls, threatening lawsuits, invoking reputation and donor influence. He's buying time, Emily said flatly, and time is what gets people killed. She stepped out into the hall, agents falling in beside her instinctively. The staff parted as she passed eyes, following her with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. She stopped in front of Hale. You should stop fighting, she told him calmly. It won't end the way you think. Hale laughed softly. You really believe you're untouchable now? Emily leaned closer, lowering her voice. No, I believe I'm accountable. That's the difference. Hale's smile faded. That afternoon, a new complication surfaced. One of the hospital servers went offline unexpectedly. A technician claimed it was a power fluctuation. The agents weren't convinced. Emily wasn't either. They're trying to erase something, she said. What an agent asked. She stared at the blank monitor. I don't know yet, but it's important enough to risk exposure. As night fell, the helicopter remained on standby, rotors silent but ready. Emily stood by the window overlooking the helipad, watching shadows stretch across concrete. She had stepped back into a world she thought she'd left behind. And now she could feel it, the familiar pressure before a storm. Somewhere inside Riverside Memorial, the truth was being hunted, and someone was preparing to strike back. By midnight, Riverside Memorial was no longer pretending to be calm. The corridors were quieter than usual, but it wasn't the peaceful quiet of sleeping patients. It was the kind that pressed against the ears, heavy with restraint. Every footstep echoed too loudly. Every door click sounded final. Emily Carter walked the length of the third-floor hallway, hands clasped behind her back, eyes scanning without appearing to scan. Two federal agents trailed her at a respectful distance, though neither of them realized she was already mapping the environment, entrances, blind spots, choke points. Old instincts never disappeared. They only slept. Server access logs are incomplete, one of the agents said as they reached the end of the corridor. Whoever pulled that shutdown knew exactly where to hit. Emily nodded. Which means they've done it before. The agent frowned. Here, not necessarily, Emily replied, but they understand systems, redundancies, human shortcuts. She stopped in front of a maintenance door marked authorized personnel only. Who has access to this, she asked. The agent checked his tablet. IT facilities, 2 administrators, and Dr. Hale. Emily didn't need to say anything. The silence did the work for her. Inside the server room, cables hummed faintly. Backup drives blinked in steady rhythms, unaware of the tension surrounding them. Emily knelt, examining the power distribution panel. This wasn't random, she said. Someone isolated the segment tied to trauma intake and patient records. Everything else stayed live. So they wanted one thing gone, the agent said. Yes, Emily replied. And they didn't finish. She stood, turning toward the exit. Get me the raw backups, not the mirrored ones. The ones no one remembers until something goes wrong. The agent hesitated. That could take hours. Then start now, she said. We don't have hours. As they moved back into the hallway, Emily felt it again, that tightening at the base of her skull. The sensation she'd learned to trust long before hospitals and ID badges. Someone was watching. She slowed her pace deliberately, letting the agents move a step ahead. Her reflection slid past the darkened windows lining the corridor. For a fraction of a second, something shifted at the far end, too subtle to alarm anyone else. Emily stopped. You two, she said quietly, without turning around. How long have you been in federal service? The agent nearest her answered automatically. 8 years. And you, she asked the other. 5. Emily nodded once. Then trust me when I say this, someone inside this building still thinks they're in control. Before either agent could respond, a shout echoed from downstairs. Code Grey. Hospital security, emergency. Emily was already moving. They reached the stairwell just as two guards ran past, faces pale. "What happened?" one of the agents demanded. "The witness," the guard gasped. "He tried to leave his room. Said someone called him." Emily's stomach dropped. "Called him," how she asked sharply. The guard swallowed. "Hospital phone. Internal extension. That shouldn't have been possible." They sprinted toward the secured wing, footsteps pounding against tile. As they rounded the corner, Emily spotted the problem immediately. The door to the witness's room was open. One agent reached for his weapon. Emily raised a hand just slightly. "Wait," she said. The room looked untouched. No overturned equipment. No signs of struggle. The patient lay in bed, breathing shallowly, eyes open. But something was wrong. Emily stepped inside first. "Don't move," she said, gently approaching the bed. Her gaze flicked to the IV line, the monitor, the oxygen tubing. The patient swallowed. "I thought they were transferring me." "Who told you that?" Emily asked. "A nurse," he replied. "She knew my name." Emily's fingers tightened around the bed rail. "Describe her." The patient hesitated. "I didn't see her face. Mask. Scrubs." Emily straightened slowly. Inside the hallway, one of the agents was already barking orders into a radio. "No transfers authorized. Lock down all exits." Too late. The lights flickered once, just once, but Emily noticed. "Get him moved," she said immediately. "Now." "Different floor. No hospital transport." The agent blinked. "Protocol is compromised," Emily cut in. "If they can reach him by phone, they can reach him anywhere predictable." The patient looked at her, fear creeping into his eyes. "What's happening?" Emily met his gaze. "They're trying to make you disappear." Minutes later, the patient was being wheeled through a service corridor, escorted by soldiers instead of staff. The route bypassed cameras, public hallways, everything that could be anticipated. Emily followed behind, mind racing. Hale, or someone using Hale's access. Either way, this was escalation. As the elevator doors closed on the patient and his escort, Emily turned to the agents. "Seal Hale's communications," she said. "All of them. We already confiscated his phone." "Then he's not the one making the calls," Emily replied. "He's the distraction." The agent's expression hardened. "You think there's someone else?" Emily nodded. "Someone who knows how hospitals work. Who knows how investigations slow down." The pieces aligned in her mind. Administrative overrides selective record, changes the ease with which the witness had been reached. "Check vendor access," she said. "Outside contractors. Anyone who can move without drawing attention." The agent's eyes widened. "Medical supply. Or it," Emily replied. "Or both." They were interrupted by raised voices at the far end of the hall. "Hale." He was shouting now, demanding to speak to his attorney, his donors, someone with sense. Two agents flanked him, hands tight on his arms. Emily approached him slowly. "You're losing your audience," she told him. Hale sneered. "You think you've won." "No," Emily said. "I think you've already lost." He leaned closer, eyes gleaming with something like desperation. "You don't know who you're up against." Emily met his stare without flinching. "Neither do you." That unsettled him more than any threat. As the night stretched on, evidence began to surface. Backup logs restored. Altered records exposed. Names connected that had never appeared together before. A pattern. And at the center of it, not Hale, but a private medical logistics firm with deep federal contracts and deeper secrets. Emily stood alone again by the window overlooking the helipad. The helicopter sat in shadow, quiet but ready. She had walked out of this hospital thinking she was done. Now she understood the truth. This wasn't about one corrupt doctor. It was about a system that assumed silence was weakness. And Emily Carter had never been weak. Dawn broke without color. A thin gray light seeped through the upper windows of Riverside Memorial, flattening everything it touched. The hospital looked stripped of its usual life. No morning chatter, no clatter of carts, no casual laughter drifting from the nurses' station. Just quiet footsteps and watchful eyes. Emily Carter stood in the temporary command room that had once been a family waiting area. Maps, access logs, and server printouts covered the walls. Federal agents moved in controlled patterns, speaking in low voices. Outside, the glass soldiers rotated shifts without ceremony. This was no longer a hospital problem. It was a containment problem. "They've gone dark," an agent reported, setting a tablet on the table. The logistics firm shut down its local offices overnight. No forwarding, No public statements. Emily didn't look surprised. They're consolidating, or running, another agent said. Running leaves tracks, Emily replied. Consolidating erases them. She leaned over the table, eyes scanning the map of the hospital and its connected facilities. They tried to extract the witness quietly. When that failed, they tested access. Phones, servers, staff. And now the first agent asked. Emily straightened. Now they escalate. As if on cue, a sharp crackle burst from the radio on the wall. "Command, this is perimeter. We've got movement." Emily turned. "Describe it," she said. Unmarked van just entered the East Service Road. No hospital markings. Drivers wearing contractor credentials. The room stilled. "That road's restricted," an agent said. "Only supply runs." Emily was already moving, which means they expect to blend in. She grabbed a jacket from the back of a chair, not for warmth but for concealment, and headed toward the exit. The agents followed instinctively, falling into formation without being told. In the service corridor, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The smell of disinfectant mixed with diesel fumes from outside. They reached a security camera feed, just as the van rolled to a stop near the loading bay. 2 men stepped out. They moved wrong. Not nervous, not hurried. Too calm, too deliberate. "Those aren't drivers," Emily said quietly. One of the men scanned the area, eyes flicking to exits, cameras, shadows. The other adjusted something beneath his jacket. A weapon. "They're here for the witness," an agent whispered. "Yes," Emily said, "but not the way you think." Before anyone could stop her, she stepped forward into the corridor, pressing a button on the wall intercom. Loading bay security, her voice echoed calmly. "This area is closed. Identify yourselves." The men froze for half a second, just long enough. One of them looked up toward the camera. Emily met his gaze through the lens. Recognition sparked, not of her face, but of her bearing. The man's jaw tightened. He reached for his radio. Emily exhaled. "That's confirmation," she said, turning back to the agents. "They know who I am now." "What do we do?" an agent asked. Emily didn't hesitate. "We take away their options." She keyed her radio. "Perimeter lockdown East Wing. Quietly. No alarms." "Copy." "Medical staff," another agent asked. "Keep them where they are," Emily replied. "No heroes." Down at the loading bay, the men split up, one heading toward the service elevator, the other lingering near the van. Emily moved fast, but not recklessly. She took the stairs 2 at a time, muscles responding as if no time had passed since she'd last done this for real. The service elevator doors slid open just as the first man reached them. "Stop," Emily said. He turned slowly. Up close, she could see it now, the training in his posture, the calculation behind his eyes. He assessed her in seconds. "You shouldn't be here," he said. Emily smiled faintly. "Neither should you." He lunged. The fight was short and silent. No dramatic blows. Just efficiency. Emily redirected his momentum, used the confined space to her advantage, and disarmed him before he could react. He hit the floor, hard air knocked from his lungs. She stepped back, already reaching for his radio. "Team 2, she said, into it, mimicking his tone. "Abort." Silence. Then static. From above, the sound of boots thundered as soldiers closed in. The second man was already retreating toward the van, but not fast enough. He didn't fight when they caught him. He didn't have to. Back in the command room, the aftermath unfolded quickly. 2 suspects in custody. Equipment confiscated. IDs traced not to hospital contractors, but to a shell company buried 3 layers deep. "This wasn't a snatch and grab," an agent said grimly. "This was damage control." Emily nodded. "They wanted the witness gone before he talked. And now they changed tactics," she said. "They'll try to discredit him. Or me." As if summoned, a young agent burst into the room, breathless. "Ma'am, we just got a call from hospital administration." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Which part?" "The board," he said. "Emergency session. They want you present." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. "They don't get to demand that," an agent said. Emily held up a hand. "No, but they get to listen." The boardroom was full when she entered. Suits, lawyers, faces pale with exhaustion and fear. Dr. Hale sat at the far end, restrained but composed eyes tracking Emily with something like hatred. The hospital director cleared his throat. "Miss Carter, this situation has spiraled far beyond our control." "Yes," Emily agreed. "Because you let it." A murmur followed. You prioritized reputation over patience, she continued. You empowered people who knew how to hide behind protocol. Hale scoffed. You're enjoying this. Emily turned to him. I'm ending it. She placed a folder on the table. Everything you altered, every decision you forced, every patient you endangered, and the people who helped you. The director stared at the contents, hands trembling. This will destroy us. Emily's voice softened, but only slightly. No, it will save the people who come after. Outside, the helicopter engines began to spin again, not as a warning, but as a reminder. This wasn't over, but it was finally moving in the right direction. The boardroom felt smaller with every passing second. Emily Carter stood at the head of the table, hands resting lightly on the polished surface, posture relaxed in a way that unsettled everyone watching. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to posture. The weight in the room came from the certainty that whatever happened next was already set in motion. Across from her, Dr. Richard Hale sat, rigid jaw clenched so tightly a vein pulsed at his temple. The confident surgeon, the man who once dominated operating rooms with a word, looked like someone bracing for impact. The hospital director cleared his throat again. Miss Carter, if what you're presenting is accurate, then this institution is facing severe consequences. Emily met his eyes. Consequences are what happen when accountability is delayed. One of the board members leaned forward, fingers steepled. You're asking us to believe that a senior surgeon coordinated with an external logistics firm to manipulate patient outcomes. I'm not asking you to believe it, Emily replied. I'm showing you. She gestured to the screen behind her. A timeline appeared clean, methodical, unforgiving. Patient intake times, altered medication orders, imaging delays, cross-referenced with vendor access logs and internal communications that should never have intersected. This patient, Emily said, pointing to a file, was transferred through your ER 6 months ago. Died within 48 hours. Cause listed as complications. She tapped another key. And this one. And this one. Silence. These weren't accidents, she continued. They were obstructions, designed to fail quietly. Hale laughed, then short, sharp and brittle. You're constructing a fantasy. You think a few spreadsheets make you judge and jury. Emily turned toward him slowly. No, she said. I think your arrogance made you predictable. The room stiffened. You assumed no one would look closely, she went on. You assumed nurses would stay quiet. You assumed administrators would protect the brand. And you assumed the patients who mattered would never survive long enough to contradict you. Hale surged to his feet, restraints forgotten. You have no proof I intended harm. Emily didn't flinch. You're right, she said calmly. Intent is difficult to prove. She nodded once toward the door. It opened. 2 soldiers entered, flanking a man in civilian clothes, tall, broad-shouldered, his movements slow but controlled. Bandages were visible beneath his jacket, but he stood on his own. The witness. Gasps rippled through the room. Hale froze. The man stepped forward, eyes scanning the faces around the table before settling on Emily. He gave her the slightest nod. They told me you might try to stop me, he said, voice steady. They didn't tell me you'd already lost. The hospital director stood abruptly. This man is not authorized to be here. He is now one of the soldiers, said flatly. Federal protection. The witness turned his attention back to Hale. You remember me, he said. You told your staff I wouldn't make it through the night. Hale's face drained of color. I don't know you. The witness smiled thinly. You ordered the wrong dosage. Just enough to weaken me. Just enough to make my statement unreliable. He reached into his jacket, slowly, deliberately, and placed a small digital recorder on the table. They thought I was unconscious, he continued. They were wrong. Emily watched the board members as realization set in. Some leaned back as if distance might protect them. Others stared at the recorder like it might explode. The witness pressed play. Hale's voice filled the room, sharp, dismissive, unmistakable. He won't survive transport. Adjust the protocol. I'll handle the paperwork. The sound ended. No one spoke. Hale's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since Emily had met him, he looked small. That's not he began. Emily cut him off. Enough. She turned to the board. This is what happens when authority goes unchecked, she said. When silence is rewarded and integrity is punished. One of the lawyers shifted uncomfortably. Miss Carter, even if all this is true, the damage to this hospital, Emily's gaze hardened, was done the moment you chose image over lives. The helicopter's low rumble seeped through the windows again, a distant reminder of who truly controlled this moment. The hospital director sank back into his chair. "What happens now?" Emily answered without hesitation. "Now you cooperate fully. You open every record. You suspend anyone involved. And you let the investigation run its course. And if we don't," someone asked quietly. Emily didn't need to respond. One of the soldiers did it for her. "Then this stops being voluntary." Hale slumped into his chair, defeat finally overtaking defiance. His eyes flicked toward Emily, searching, accusing. "You planned this," he said hoarsely. Emily shook her head. "No, you did." She stepped back as agents moved in, uncuffing Hale from the chair, only to restrain him properly this time. As he was escorted out, the room felt lighter, like pressure released after a long storm. The witness exhaled shakily. "Is it over?" Emily met his gaze. "The hardest part is." Outside, the boardroom staff lined the corridor in stunned silence, as Hale passed by, no longer a figure of authority, just another man facing the consequences of his choices. Emily watched him go, then turned toward the window. The helicopter lifted smoothly from the helipad sunlight, catching its blades for the first time that morning. Not a threat, not a spectacle, a signal. For years, Emily had stayed quiet because she believed silence could protect people. Now she understood something deeper. Silence could also protect the wrong ones. And today, it had finally been broken. The arrest of Dr. Richard Hale didn't bring relief the way most people expected. It brought tension. Within hours, the news began to leak, first through internal emails, then through hushed phone calls to spouses and friends, and finally through local reporters parked just beyond the hospital gates. Riverside Memorial became a focal point, its name scrolling across news tickers alongside phrases like federal investigation and medical misconduct. Emily Carter watched the chaos unfold from a distance. She stood in a quiet observation room on the 6th floor, arms folded loosely, eyes tracking the movement of agents below as they escorted boxes of seized records into waiting vehicles. Her expression never changed, but inside she felt the familiar pull of something unfinished. Hale had been loud, arrogant, careless. He was never the real threat. "They're going to pivot," Emily said without turning as an agent entered the room. The agent nodded grimly. "Media strategy." "No," Emily replied. "Survival strategy." She finally faced him. Hale was expendable. He was a gatekeeper, not the architect. The agent hesitated. "You think the logistics firm will try something else? I think they already are." As if to prove her point, another agent hurried in, holding up a tablet. "Ma'am, we just intercepted a call. Legal counsel for MedSure Logistics is filing an emergency injunction." Emily's eyes sharpened. "Against what?" "Against the witness's testimony. They're claiming medical coercion, that his condition makes him unreliable." Emily exhaled slowly. "Of course they are." Down the hall, the witness, now officially identified as Daniel Reeves, sat in a secured room with 2 soldiers stationed outside. His injuries were healing, but the weight of what he carried was only growing heavier. Emily entered quietly. "You heard," he said before she could speak. She nodded. "They're trying to discredit you." Daniel gave a humorless smile. "That's their move. If I'm unstable, everything I say becomes suspect." Emily leaned against the counter. "They won't stop there." "No," he agreed. "They'll come after you too." She met his gaze. "Let them." Daniel studied her carefully. "You knew this would happen." "Yes," Emily said. "That's why I stayed." He shifted uncomfortably. "Why me?" Emily didn't answer right away. "Because you didn't disappear when you were supposed to," she said finally. "And because you were willing to speak, even knowing the cost." Daniel nodded slowly. "They underestimated you." "So did this hospital," Emily replied. Outside the room, voices rose in the corridor. A heated argument. Emily stepped out just as 2 administrators confronted a federal agent. "You can't hold our systems indefinitely," one of them insisted. "We have patience. You have an obligation," the agent cut in. "One you ignored." Emily stepped between them. "You want this to end?" she asked calmly. "Then stop protecting ghosts." The administrators fell silent. That afternoon, something shifted. The raw backups Emily had requested earlier finally finished restoring. Hidden beneath layers of legitimate transactions was a parallel stream: diverted supplies, altered shipment destinations, equipment that never reached hospitals listed on federal contracts. And names. Not just Hale's. Doctors, administrators, external consultants. A network. The agent reviewing the data looked up slowly. This goes back years. Emily nodded. Long enough for people to forget why rules existed in the first place. By evening, warrants were being drafted. Medshore logistics offices were raided across 3 states. Servers seized, accounts frozen, executives detained for questioning. What had started as a hospital scandal was now a federal case with national implications. Still, Emily didn't relax. Not yet. She stood once more by the hospital exit, the same doors she had walked through less than 48 hours earlier, carrying a box and the quiet certainty that she was done. Now the doors slid open again. Reporters shouted questions from behind barricades. Camera flashes lit up the dusk. Soldiers moved into position not to intimidate but to protect. "Miss Carter," someone called. "Are you military?" Emily stopped. She turned slowly, eyes scanning the crowd. For a moment the noise faded. She thought of the years she'd spent choosing silence, of the lives she'd saved without recognition, of the cost of being seen. She stepped forward just enough to be heard. "I'm a medical professional," she said evenly, "and I did my job." The murmurs shifted. Another reporter shouted, "Did you orchestrate this investigation?" Emily shook her head. The truth did that. Inside, the hospital staff watched from windows and hallways, some with awe, some with guilt, some with quiet relief. Linda Pearson stood near the nurse's station, arms wrapped around herself. When Emily passed her, Linda spoke. "I should have listened to you," she said softly. Emily paused. "You should listen to the next person who speaks up," she replied. "That's how this changes." Later that night, the witness was transferred not to another hospital but to a secured federal facility far from Riverside. The helicopter lifted smoothly into the dark sky, its lights blinking like distant stars. Emily watched it go. An agent approached her one last time. "Command wants to know what you plan to do now." Emily considered the question. For years, she'd believed anonymity was peace. Now she understood something else. "Teach," she said. "Advise. Make sure this doesn't happen again." The agent smiled faintly. "They'll want you back." "Maybe," Emily replied, "but on my terms." As she turned away from the helipad, the hospital behind her felt different. Smaller, more honest. The system had tried to erase her. Instead, it had exposed itself. And for the first time in a long while, Emily Carter walked forward not into silence, but into purpose. The hearings began before the hospital could recover its breath. Federal subpoenas arrived in waves, precise, relentless, impossible to ignore. Riverside Memorial's board convened in emergency sessions that stretched late into the night, their conversations no longer about reputation or donors, but survival. Lawyers filled hallways once reserved for families. Administrators who had spent careers avoiding scrutiny now learned how quickly authority dissolved under evidence. Emily Carter attended the first hearing as an observer. She sat in the back row of a government conference room, posture composed, expression unreadable. Around her, people whispered, some recognizing her from the footage that had already circulated online. Others only knew her as a name appearing repeatedly in reports marked material witness and subject matter expert. Dr. Richard Hale sat at the front, flanked by counsel. Without his white coat and hospital deference, he looked ordinary, smaller. The man who once commanded operating rooms with a glare now deferred to attorneys who spoke for him. Emily didn't feel satisfaction watching him there. She felt clarity. When the first witness took the stand, an IT contractor who admitted to altering server access at Hale's request, the room shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but irrevocably. Each admission peeled away another layer of denial. Emily's phone buzzed quietly. A message from a federal liaison. "You'll be called tomorrow." She closed her eyes briefly, then slipped the phone back into her pocket. That night, she walked the perimeter of the hospital alone. The building loomed against the sky, windows glowing softly, a reminder of the lives still unfolding inside. Riverside Memorial would survive. Institutions often did. The question was whether it would learn. The next day, Emily took the stand. She answered questions calmly, methodically. She explained protocols without embellishment. She described patterns without accusation. She spoke about patient care with precision and restraint, never raising her voice, never claiming heroism. When asked why she hadn't reported concerns earlier, she paused. "Because the system was designed to discourage it," she said. "And because I believed doing my job well would be enough." The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. Outside the hearing room, cameras waited. Emily exited through a side corridor, avoiding the noise. She wasn't interested in becoming a symbol. Symbols were easy to dismiss. Change required work. Back at Riverside, interim leadership took over. Dr. Hale's name was removed from directories. Administrative staff were suspended pending review. New policies were announced. Transparent audits, independent oversight protections for whistleblowers that hadn't existed before. Linda Pearson was reassigned. Not fired. Not rewarded. Placed where she could no longer silence others. When Linda approached Emily in the hallway, her voice trembled. "I didn't think they'd listen to someone like me." Emily met her eyes. "They will if you keep speaking." The days blurred together, briefings, depositions, consultations. Emily worked without ceremony, advising federal teams on medical integrity and chain of command failures. She reviewed policies line by line, pointing out where human behavior, not malice but convenience, created cracks. At night she slept lightly. Old habits returned. Early mornings, long walks, the quiet assessment of risk. Then came the offer. It arrived in the form of a simple folder slid across a table by a senior official she had never met before. The room was spare the tone professional. "We want you to lead a national review," he said. "Hospitals, trauma systems, military-civilian coordination. You understand both worlds." Emily didn't open the folder. "And if I say no?" she asked. The official nodded. "Then we'll find someone else. But they won't see what you see." Emily considered that. The temptation to disappear again tugged at her, a familiar pull toward anonymity, toward quiet work done without scrutiny. She thought of Daniel Reeves recovering under protection, of the patients who had never been given that chance, of the nurses who had learned to look away because it was safer. "I don't want a title," she said finally, "and I don't want a desk." The official smiled faintly. "We wouldn't insult you." She opened the folder. Outside, Riverside Memorial slowly found its rhythm again. Ambulances arrived. ER doors swung open and closed. Lives were saved. Others weren't. Medicine remained imperfect. But something had shifted. People asked more questions now. Nurses documented more carefully. Administrators hesitated before dismissing concerns. Silence no longer felt like the default. On her last evening at the hospital, Emily stood near the exit, the same spot where everything had changed. The concrete still bore faint marks from the helicopter's landing gear. The air was calm, ordinary. A young nurse approached her hesitantly. "Miss Carter," Emily turned. "Yes, I just wanted to say, I saw what you did," the nurse said, "and I won't forget it." Emily nodded once. "Good." As she walked away, she felt the familiar weight settle, not of responsibility alone, but of choice. She could leave again, or she could stay close enough to matter. Behind her, Riverside Memorial continued on, scarred but standing. Ahead, a path opened, uncertain, demanding, necessary. Emily Carter didn't look back, not because she was done, but because the work was finally facing forward. The final reckoning didn't arrive with sirens or helicopters. It came quietly through documents, decisions, and doors closing behind people who had once believed they were untouchable. Emily Carter sat in a modest federal conference room hundreds of miles from Riverside Memorial, reviewing a draft policy that would soon circulate nationwide. It was dense, technical, unglamorous work, exactly the kind that changed outcomes without anyone noticing until it mattered. She marked a paragraph, slid the folder aside, and stood to stretch. Outside the window, traffic moved steadily along a 6-lane highway, headlights flickering like distant signals. Life continuing. Her phone buzzed. A message from the liaison she'd worked with since the beginning, charges finalized. Hale accepted a plea deal, full cooperation. Emily closed her eyes for a moment. It wasn't victory she felt, just finality. Hale's fall had rippled outward. Several administrators resigned quietly. 2 consultants were barred permanently from federal contracts. MedSure Logistics dissolved under the weight of its own exposure. Its assets seized, its executives facing indictments that would stretch on for years. The system hadn't been cleansed, but it had been interrupted. Emily returned to Riverside Memorial one last time a week later, not under escort, not under authority, but by invitation. The interim board wanted her input on a new oversight framework. She agreed with conditions. No press, no ceremony. When she walked through the hospital doors, the reaction was different now. Staff didn't stare. They didn't whisper. They simply nodded, some with gratitude, others with a sober understanding that things had changed. She passed the ER where it had all begun. The monitors beeped steadily. A trauma team moved with practiced coordination. For a moment, everything felt normal. That was the point. In a small meeting room, she laid out her expectations. Transparency isn't a memo, she told them. It's a habit. If you punish people for speaking up, you will lose the ones who matter most. The director, new, younger, visibly cautious, listened carefully. We're committed to doing better. Emily met his gaze. Then prove it when no one's watching. Later, she found Linda Pearson in the staff lounge packing up her things. Linda looked older somehow, quieter. I'm transferring, Linda said. Out of management. Emily nodded. That's probably wise. Linda hesitated. I thought leadership meant control. I was wrong. Yes, Emily said gently. It does. They parted without ceremony. Outside, dusk settled over the parking structure. Emily stood where she had once been saluted, the concrete cool beneath her feet. No helicopter. No soldiers. Just the hum of the city and the distant wail of an ambulance heading somewhere else. Her work here was done. The offer she had accepted carefully, selectively, didn't come with an office or a rank. It came with a schedule measured in miles traveled and conversations had behind closed doors. She advised trauma centers, military hospitals, emergency networks. She asked questions others didn't think to ask. And sometimes she listened. Months later, she received a handwritten note forwarded through secure channels. I testified today, it read. I wouldn't have survived to do it without you. Whatever you're building now, keep going. Daniel Reeves. Emily folded the note and placed it in her bag. The world hadn't changed overnight. It never did. But cracks had formed in places long sealed shut. Light filtered through. On her final evening in the city, Emily walked past Riverside Memorial one last time. She didn't go in. She didn't need to. She had walked out once, carrying a box of personal belongings, believing she was finished. Now she walked past with empty hands and a clear purpose. Sometimes justice didn't arrive with applause. Sometimes it arrived with a choice to stay silent or to stand. Emily Carter had made hers. And somewhere behind hospital walls, in conference rooms and quiet offices across the country, others were beginning to make theirs too. The story didn't end with a verdict. It never did. Months after the investigation closed, Riverside Memorial looked the same from the outside, glass, steel, steady traffic flowing past its entrance. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. Not loudly, not perfectly, but enough to matter. Emily Carter knew this because she no longer had to be there to feel it. She stood on a quiet overlook, nearly 1,000 miles away, watching early morning light creep across a training facility that didn't exist on any public map. The air was cool, just under 60 degrees Fahrenheit, carrying the faint smell of concrete and metal. Below her, a group of medical professionals moved through a simulated mass casualty scenario. Doctors, nurses, medics, some civilian, some military. They didn't know her full story. They didn't need to. All right, Emily said, stepping forward. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. It always had. Run it again. This time, I want you to assume the protocol failed. A few startled looks passed between the trainees. One of them raised a hand. Ma'am, what if there's no backup? Emily met his eyes. Then you become the backup. That lesson, simple, uncomfortable, necessary, was why she was here. She had refused titles, declined command. What she built instead was quieter, a rotating advisory role that embedded accountability into systems before corruption could calcify. She taught people how to see patterns, how to question orders without chaos, how to recognize when silence was no longer neutral. Sometimes she consulted. Sometimes she testified. Sometimes she walked away when institutions wanted symbolism instead of change. That morning, during a break, one of the younger nurses approached her hesitantly. I heard about what happened at that hospital, the nurse said. About you. Emily didn't correct her. What would you have done, the nurse asked, if no one had come? If the helicopter never landed? Emily considered the question. I would have still told the truth, she said. It just would have taken longer for anyone to listen. The nurse nodded, absorbing that. Across the country, the effects of Riverside Memorial continued to ripple outward. Whistleblower protections were strengthened in several states. Federal audits became routine instead of reactive. A few hospitals resisted. Some always would, but more didn't. Daniel Reeves testified again, this time without fear. His recovery was slow but steady. He returned to work in a limited capacity, choosing roles that kept others alive without putting himself back in the shadows. Dr. Richard Hale disappeared from headlines. His name surfaced only in legal documents and cautionary case studies. A reminder, not a myth. As for Riverside Memorial, it found a new rhythm. Not perfect, not pure, but more honest than before. Late one evening, Emily received a message forwarded from a nurse she barely remembered. "We stopped a mistake today because someone spoke up. I think you should know that." Emily read it once, then again. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. That night, she walked alone along the edge of the facility boots, crunching softly on gravel. The sky above was clear, stars sharp and distant. No rotors, no alarms, just quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't fear, but awareness. Emily Carter had spent years being underestimated because she didn't announce herself, because she didn't demand recognition, because she walked away when others would have fought for credit. But power had never belonged to the loudest voice in the room. It belonged to the one who knew when to speak and did. Somewhere, another hospital hummed through the night. Another nurse made a hard call. Another administrator hesitated before ignoring a warning. And somewhere, a system bent just slightly toward justice. Emily turned back toward the building, toward the work that still waited. She wasn't a symbol. She wasn't a legend. She was proof. Not every hero wears a uniform, and not every battle is fought where people can see it. Sometimes the most dangerous moment is the one where silence feels easier than truth. Emily Carter didn't change the world by demanding authority. She changed it by refusing to look away. This story is a reminder that integrity often comes at a cost, but the cost of ignoring it is always higher. Real justice doesn't arrive with applause or headlines. It arrives when ordinary people choose courage in quiet rooms, when systems are challenged instead of obeyed, and when respect is earned, not demanded. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? And if you believe powerful stories can make us better, don't forget to subscribe.